Hello, this is Bad Vibes. Today's video is on exes, whether they're friends or someone you dated. Also, there's one mother-in-law from Hell Story. Joining me today is Papa Scare, helping me make this a longer video for you. So sub to his channel if you enjoy his narrations. Link will be in the description, as well as the pinned comment. As always, all ads are in the start of the video, so you can sit back, relax, and enjoy. So to preface this, I was young, maybe 18 or 19, and had no idea what we were getting into. So my father owns 3 businesses and was actively dating his business partner and was providing for her. She also made advances on me, which kinda creeped me out. She would buy us all food at first, and I was grateful. But then I started becoming nervous as she wanted to be alone with me a lot. My father ended up getting married, not to her, but didn't tell her, and she got really upset at him. She came to my job and demanded to see my father, which I told her he wasn't here. She screamed at me and said that we would soon regret it. Due to the disturbing nature of it, I called the cops, and all they did was take my name, but not actually look into it. So fast forward, I came home around midnight, as I had just came from my second job. Dead tired from school and work, I ate and crashed on my bed. It had to be at least 3 in the morning when I heard my door open. At first, I didn't move because I assumed it was my calico cat, Misty, pawing at my door, as she liked to sleep with me. When I groaned her name and she didn't answer, it struck me as strange, but I still wasn't worried until I felt a presence standing over me. I quickly woke up and discovered my father's ex in our house, above me, crazy-eyed. She was screaming, saying how she would get revenge on my father. I quickly rolled out of bed and past her, and called the authorities. She openly tried to fight my father's wife, and tried to stab my dad. The police came and arrested her on the spot. That was the scariest shit I've ever been through, and I'm so glad I won't have to see her again. Now I sleep with a blade next to my bed, and a taser. Please be careful, as you never know who may pay you a late night visit. This happened a few years ago. I was dating this guy, which I'll refer to as John. So John and I had been together for 2 months or so, and I thought everything was okay. However, 3 months into our relationship, he started to show up during my class break and when my class ended. To some people, it may be sweet, but to me, it was hella creepy. I didn't give him any details about my class, nor the timetable. Things started to get creepy and he started becoming demanding and possessive as well. Soon after, I broke up with him because I couldn't take it anymore. What happened after really scared me. I started receiving gifts in my house letterbox with notes on how I belong with him and only him. I never gave him my address. He even came to wait outside my classes and at public areas for me, but I would usually get saved by a friend who knew about the issue. One night, I ended class really late, so I had to go home alone. I guess he was probably stalking me because when I was reaching the elevator, someone grabbed me really hard. I got a bruise on my wrist thanks to him. I didn't need to think twice, and I knew it was him. He started shouting at me about how I avoided him and called me a slut for hanging out with my guy friends. Honestly, I was terrified. Luckily for me, my brother was on his way back, and thank goodness he saw what happened and came running. Thankfully, John ran away, and I started crying when my brother came to hug me. I have never felt so grateful in my life before. Thank goodness I have an older brother. I made my brother promise not to tell my parents, as I didn't want them to worry about me. After that day, my brother started fetching me back home daily, and John never appeared again. Maybe this isn't terrifying to some of you, but it's really traumatizing for me. Even now, the idea of going home alone still terrifies me.
So this happened last year, lasting around 9 months. I'm from Bermuda and was in Leesburg, Florida for college. I've always had a hard time making friends, and since I was new, I had an even harder time. So I used Tinder to find friends or potential partners. I was on Tinder one day after striking out with someone previously. I saw my ex's profile and figured I could do worse, so I swiped and we matched. I'm realizing now that he was a rebound. He told me that he was in an open relationship at the time and about things his boyfriend did to him, so I felt bad for him. During the first 2 dates, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I spent a few days over at his parents' house and found out what his home life was like, which made me feel even worse for him. Turns out he'd been homeschooled all his life, and his parents were and still are degenerates. One night, we were at his place and he told me he loved me. And it had only been a week at this point. Honestly, that alone should have been a red flag, but I ignored it. Fast forward to when I was in Bermuda for the summer. It was 4.5 months of agony. At the time, my ex was overly dependent and problematic. If I said even the slightest thing wrong, normal talking points like things I noticed that were particularly unhealthy or things that impacted me negatively, I was in for at least an hour of self-pity and depreciation. I was stressed every day. I was pretty much having to walk on eggshells for 4.5 months to the point where I nearly dumped him. I should have. It was also during this 4-month period that I learned a lot of unsettling things that I wrote off but shouldn't have. He told me he was a necrophile. He joked about being a serial killer, but was partially serious. And the list goes on. But those are what I could remember off the top of my head. Unfortunately, rather than dousing these flames, I only fanned them. I got back to Leesburg, and things only got worse from there. The pity and depreciation got worse. My ex even outed me to his dad, who is xenophobic. It was an accident, but I don't care. It was shitty. This also could have ended our relationship. I was taking care of him in such a way that I was essentially his parent. I even had to teach him to look both ways before crossing the street. I didn't know I had a savior complex at the time, and my therapist pointed it out, and that because of the savior complex and my pity for my ex, I was burning myself out catering to him, and that I needed to get out of the relationship ASAP. It took me a while to do it, but I eventually did. When I broke up with him, I explained how I felt and what my therapist had said. I told him the only thing that would change would be that if we weren't technically in a relationship. But that was it. Nothing else would change. Not even 2 days after, he tried to kill himself while he was on the phone with me. Fast forward to Thanksgiving. I was with my current girlfriend, visiting her family, and I sent a DM to my ex, asking him a question. I ended up finding out that when he and I met, he wasn't actually in an open relationship, and that he had used me to cheat on his boyfriend. I told him I didn't want him in my life anymore, and that was that. I wish that was the end of the story, but it's not. It was getting towards Christmas, and I was doing terribly. I was trying to improve my life, but nothing was going right. I lost my other girlfriend at the time. I'm polyamorous. And lost most of my friends. Even my roommate's girlfriend was actively trying to get me kicked out of our apartment. I foolishly let my ex be my friend again because I couldn't take being alone. But he was worse than before. The abuse was subliminal before, but now it was outright. When he was sober, he was okay-ish, but when he wasn't, he was abusive. He claimed he loved me, but treated some transphobic girl he met in the psych ward, who he knew was using him, better than he treated me. When I called him out on it, he threw a fit. A few days later, I was on the phone with him. I ended up having a panic attack and bawling my eyes out. I hadn't cried for 4 years before that. My current girlfriend was my saving grace and helped me to finally get my ex out of my life for good. So yeah, let's not meet again, or you're losing teeth.
Just a heads up, this is a long story that involves some violence. I apologize if I'm posting this in the wrong spot, but it has elements of stalking, and I was terrified by this person for some time. I may not leave it up for long as I'm still sort of afraid of him seeing this. So this happened about 10 years ago when I was in college. I was a sophomore, a 19 or 20-year-old female, and I was horribly naive. The college I went to was a religious school. This is partly the reason why this problem continued on as long as it did. This school had several rules that students had to follow. The rules important to the story are: no drinking on campus, you could only visit the opposite sex in their room during visitation hours, and during that visitation, the door had to be left open. I was not an unattractive girl, and I happened to draw the attention of a guy who shared the same major as I did. This means we had a bunch of classes together. He introduced himself to me as Andy, and we began talking. He was very tall, about 6'4", and quite heavy. At one point, he weighed about 300 pounds. He expressed romantic interest in me, but I wasn't attracted to him and told him this whenever he brought it up. He would immediately backtrack and say how happy he was being my friend and that he didn't mind that I didn't care about him romantically. I did get along very well with him though, and we hung out, just the two of us, frequently. The other people in our class began to expect to see us together, and we became fast friends. Andy had a girlfriend when we first met who attended another school. He broke up with her during the summer break between freshman and sophomore year. But unbeknownst to me, the reason for the breakup was that he wanted to start pursuing me more actively. When I came back from summer break, something had changed. Andy became more forward towards me, often making comments about how pretty I was and that I should be with him. I began to become uncomfortable with the attention and told him this so many times. I unfortunately didn't want to lose him as a friend since he was one of my only few friends I hung out with. A lot of those friends I met through him, so if I cut him off, I would have close to no one to talk to. Andy would often swing wildly from charming and sweet to insulting and manipulative. He would offer to take me places and help me out with things, then would say that I owed him so much in return for those things. He would say that we were so close and we should just date since we were already practically together all the time. Alcohol made him the worst. I tried to avoid drinking with him, but it did happen occasionally, either off campus or sneakily while in the dorm room. He sometimes used my past relationships to manipulate me into feeling guilty. As a religious person, I had committed the cardinal sin by sleeping with two guys I had previously dated before meeting Andy. He brought this up a lot, implying that I was damaged goods because of this. He at one point told me, "I'm the best man you could possibly get because of your past." Eventually I caved and told him that I would date him just to see if there was any feelings there whatsoever. This of course made him ecstatic, but it also made him extremely overprotective of me and jealous of any attention I received from anyone of the opposite sex. He would call and text me constantly, and if I didn't pick up the first time, he would call me until I did. He constantly questioned where I was going to be and would follow me there, if possible. I worked for the college as a short order cook at their late night grill, and Andy would wait for me to get off of work almost every night. He would sit at one of the tables for hours, just waiting for me to finish my shift. It began to creep me out, but I chalked it up to him being an overprotective boyfriend. We did eventually have sex, but I was still not physically attracted to Andy, and I was essentially waiting for him to finish every time we did the deed. He made me feel like it was a necessary part of a relationship, and that, because I slept with all my exes, I needed to sleep with him. Despite this, I did generally enjoy his company, and our conversations when he wasn't being possessive. We tried being in a relationship for 2 months until Christmas break rolled around. When I went home, I had a chance to clear my head and speak to my family about the situation. My mom especially seemed uncomfortable with how frequently Andy contacted me, and it got way worse while we were apart. He got a hold of my family members' Facebook page and phone numbers, and he would call and message them whenever I didn't immediately answer his calls or texts. It got to the point where he would be calling me upwards to 10 times a day, and I had hundreds of texts from him. This was a time where you had to pay for a certain number of texts per month, and no matter how many times I told him that he was using up all my texts, he would still text message me. I honestly couldn't afford this relationship anymore. After thinking long and hard about it, I called him up. I told him how I felt and thought this relationship wasn't working. I said the cliche phrase, I still want to be friends, and I genuinely meant it. Andy flipped out. He began calling me and messaging me more and more frequently than before, at all hours of the day and night, switching wildly from, "You broke my heart, please come back to me," to, "How dare you, you stupid bitch, I deserve way better than you," and then back again. I had no clue what to do. I dreaded returning to school. When the day finally came and I went back to campus, Andy sought me out. He'd freak out on me for no reason, curse at me all the time and call me names, then apologize profusely. His attitudes would change frequently, sometimes the next day, sometimes even the next hour. He still waited for me outside of my work. He still followed me back to my dorm. He still walked with a group of friends to and from class. When they were around, he would pretend to want to be friends, then wait until we were walking alone to start in on me. He would push me or step on the back of my heels when I was walking and mock me. Then when I complained, he would say that he was just joking. I didn't realize it at the time, but he was showing all these warning signs, and I was so stupid and naive to pick up on them. I did tell him I thought we needed to spend more time apart, and that worked for a short while. Andy eventually seemed to even out, and a few weeks later invited me to his dorm room to play video games as a peace offering. When I arrived, he snuck me in the back way so he didn't have to leave the door open. He offered me a drink. This made me nervous, but I was an underage college student, so far be it from me to turn down an alcoholic beverage. Everything seemed to be going all right. We were getting along and joking around, so I got more comfortable. I had another drink, and quickly after this I started to feel exceedingly tired and had trouble standing. I don't know if he was topping off my drink when I wasn't looking, or God forbid he put something in my drink, but there was no way I was leaving that room that night. Andy became very accommodating and arranged for me to crash on his couch. I agreed, but I could tell something wasn't right, so I told him in a drowsy voice while slurring my words that in no uncertain terms would he try anything sexual. He laughed it off but agreed. The last thing I remember is curling up on the couch and falling asleep. I don't need to tell you what happened that night while I was passed out. The next morning when I found out, I was horrified. I yelled at Andy, who laughed it off as something funny, and that I brought it on myself by drinking. Then I left. I went to my dorm room across campus, crawled into bed and cried. I skipped classes that day and stayed in my room the whole time. I called out of work. I didn't want to do anything or see anyone. I didn't want to tell anyone what happened then. At some point during the afternoon, Andy tried to sneak into my room. I freaked out, yelling at him to get the fuck out. He apologized and told me that he wanted to drop some things off and that he didn't think I'd be here. He had a hot water bottle and some flowers. How sweet. Not. He kind of threw them in my room and shut the door as I yelled at him to leave me alone. A couple months went by. Andy still followed me sometimes, but I told him to back off. He still messaged me, but I mostly ignored him. He followed me off campus on multiple occasions, and I also learned that he had been following me around for quite some time. I began to develop anxiety about seeing him everywhere and went to the campus doctor. I explained parts of the story to him, and he gave me some Xanax and antidepressants to help with my paranoia. I tried my best to function, but my grades suffered and so did my friendships. By this point, I had maybe 3 friends left who didn't think I was a horrible person that led Andy on, then dumped him and broke his heart. Icing on the cake for me was when Andy crashed my birthday party. Apparently, he asked one of my friends if he could help plan it, but she didn't know that we weren't speaking, so she agreed. He showed up to the park where it was being held, drank all the alcohol, then began telling my few friends I still had left how much of a bitch I was. He called me a whore. He told them that I led him on and broke his heart, and the entire evening was ruined. Unfortunately, he was too drunk to drive himself home, so I was nominated to bring him back by driving his car. I mentioned that I didn't want to go by myself, so my friend offered to ride with me to help carry him to his dorm room, but immediately after that she booked it. She left me alone with him in his dorm room, even though I told her I was extremely uncomfortable being alone with him. She knew some of what happened, but I think she figured I was being dramatic or exaggerating. Immediately after she left, all of a sudden he wasn't that drunk anymore. He immediately turned hostile and threatening. He told me that if I didn't stay with him, he would hurt himself and pulled out a pair of scissors. He held the blade of the scissors to his wrist, and I took a step back. I was at a loss of what to do in this situation, so I simply stated that he shouldn't hurt himself, but I really wanted to leave. I backed up slowly and went to the door, but he jumped up, dropped his scissors, thank God, and grabbed my wrist. He yanked me back from the doorway and twisted my arm behind my back until I cried out. Then he threw me against the wall, face first, slammed the door shut and locked it. Then he picked me up. I'm fairly tall, but he's close to 6'4" and big. He tossed me on his bed. I was terrified, but I told him if he didn't let me go, I would scream. He covered my mouth with his hand and told me if I screamed, I would get in trouble for violating visitation, something that I had already gotten in trouble with once before, and there was a risk of being expelled if I got caught again. He said that he would let me get up if I promised to stay in the room with him. I tried to portray that I was calm and relaxed, but inside I was scared for my life. I thought if I stayed, he would try to assault me again, or worse. I agreed to stay with him, and he let me up off the bed. I sat up, and with all my strength I could muster, I smiled. I said I'd be okay hanging out with him, but I really had to use the restroom. He agreed, but told me not to take long. He said he would be waiting outside the door. The dorm bathroom was actually a shared bathroom between 2 dorm rooms. In Andy's room, there's a door to the right that led to the bathroom. Then if you walked through the bathroom, there would be another door to the opposite side that led to another dorm room. Both bathroom doors could be locked from the inside to prevent someone from one dorm using the bathroom to access the other dorm room. I went into the bathroom and closed Andy's door, then prayed that the guys that lived next to the dorm room were trusted enough to leave the bathroom door unlocked. I walked to the other side and tried the doorknob. Miraculously, it turned, and I opened the door into a room of 2 very surprised guys. I apologized and mumbled I just needed to get out of there before turning to leave. They both stared at me as I ran out the front door. I left that residence hall and ran all the way across campus to my dorm. All of a sudden, I heard footsteps behind me and heard someone shouting my name. My heart sank. It was Andy. I panicked, but the hall that housed my dorm room was directly ahead of me. I picked up the pace, and Andy followed suit. He was gaining on me, and it had been ages since I ran. I'm the perfect example of saying, if I'm running, you better run too, because something is chasing me. I could see the entrance of the dorm room. I had my key out and grabbed the door handle of the first set of doors. There were 2 sets of doors that led into my residence hall. The first one was always unlocked, but the second one you needed a key for. When I got inside of the first doors, Andy caught up to me and grabbed me by my arm. He tried to use his weight advantage to pull me back from the second set of doors and out of the entrance. I fought with everything I had, yelling at him to let me go the whole time. I saw through the dorm room window that people were inside the foyer, and if I could just get their attention, I could get one of them to open the door. I finally managed to get close enough to the second set of doors to knock. The instant I knocked on the door, Andy let me go. He then walked away quickly, letting out a few choice curse words fly in my direction before jogging back in the direction he came from. When a guy from inside opened the door, he saw a girl who was out of breath, on the verge of tears. He asked me if I was okay, and I said, "I think so," then waved him away. I ran to my dorm room and locked the door immediately. The very next day, I contacted my RA about the situation. I showed her some of the messages Andy sent me and explained that he had broken visitation by coming into my dorm room to drop stuff off for me and that he had just chased me across campus. She was immediately concerned and contacted the Dean of Discipline. They instituted a ban on Andy being allowed to enter my dorm and told him to stay away from me and to not contact me anymore. It took him a long time to even begin to comply. I should have gone to the police, but when I met the Dean of Discipline, he strongly encouraged me to keep everything in-house. He said, "We are a family, and we will deal with this internally, like a family should." I didn't learn this until years later, but this is the attitude of many colleges when dealing with victims of stalking and assault. Eventually, over the next summer, I told my mother most of the details of what happened, and she cried with me. She was extremely supportive and drove me 5 hours to the police department in town where the college is located so I could file a report. They basically said that since it had been so long since the assault and there wasn't much that they can do, but I could try to get a restraining order. I followed their directions and was able to get a restraining order against Andy. He violated the order several times and ended up going back to court. The court put so many restrictions on him that he ended up having to transfer to another college while I finished my degree. When I graduated, I got out of there and never looked back. I returned to my hometown where I moved back in with my family and got a decent job. I've dealt with anxiety, depression, and extreme paranoia since then, and for a while I was terrified that he would find me again and finish what he started. I got a firearm card and bought a handgun that I keep under my nightstand for protection. I never had to use it outside of practicing at a range, fortunately. I eventually found a fantastic guy who is amazing, sweet, kind, and very understanding of my past. He is also super handsome, I might add. We are now married and I have never been happier, and I'm so glad I got out of that situation. Many women aren't as lucky. Andy, let's never meet again, because if you try to hurt me, I'll probably be armed.
So, some backstory. I was born in Philadelphia with a Sudanese background. I lived there for 12 years, moved to UAE, and enrolled in a British school. So this takes place in 2017 to 2018, around the first term, and is the start of junior high. I accidentally skipped the morning assembly, national anthem singing, and flag raising, which we do every morning in the schoolyard. I go straight up to the class and pick up my desk. Morning assembly finishes and the other girls come up and introduce themselves, but for some reason, the desk in front of me is empty. School separates classes by gender and Year 5 for religious values. Apparently that year, Aileen's family took a trip to their home country and were coming back a month late. So she arrives to get her desk and plops in front of me. Fast forward about 3 weeks in the school year, and our teacher, who was amazing, asked if we wanted to switch desks. And Aileen goes to her and says I distract her. Understandable. I always try to make conversation and often ramble. She switches desks and life goes on. One day, out of the blue, during PE, Aileen goes, "You're like my best friend." I was shocked. After changing desks, I didn't force friendship since I knew she wasn't very fond of me. At this point in the school year, I still wasn't settled in due to the culture shock, so I did my best to be a good friend to Aileen. This is when all the problems started. I admit, I do too many favors for other people and often see myself being taken advantage of, but Aileen made me a train wreck. One day our science teacher announced the science fair, and I decided to join on a solo project and wrote my name down on the board outside of the reception. What I didn't know is that Aileen wrote her name down next to mine and put us in the partners division along with another girl. When the teacher announced the names of the class to make sure they were correct, I heard my name with Aileen's and the other girls. So she just turned around to smile at me while I just sat there, dumbfounded. When I confronted her, her response was just, "I didn't have anyone to work with, and your name was blank, so I just put my name down with girl." I couldn't do anything about it, so when we had a week left before the fair, me and girl went to Aileen's house after school. Girl couldn't come with me and Aileen after school to her house, so that left me alone with her until 8 p.m. While waiting for her to finish up on her after-school clubs, I was reading, and she insisted I play netball with them. But I couldn't since I have a mild form of EDS that affects my arms and hands, so I can't really throw or pull. I'm often excused from PE class, and the school nurses are trained to help relocate my joints. But she just grabs my arm and pulls me to come play. At this point, my arm gives out and comes out of my joint and my hands as well. I'm yelling at her to let me go since I'm in intense pain. Thankfully, we were on a field, so the nurse's office was close. She heard me yelling and took me to her office and helped relocate my joint, gave me some ice and pain meds. So I stayed resting until Aileen's mum came out to pick me and her up, and we went to her house. When we got to the car, Aileen's sisters, one 9 and another 2, got in with us. I held the youngest one while Aileen let the other play on her iPad. This was fine until the baby started pulling on my fingers. Normally, I would just ask the adult to take her child, while I go find a nurse or doctor, or, in some cases, put my joints in myself. I took first aid after finding out I had EDS. I asked Aileen to put her sister on her lap while I find my pain meds and put my joints back in place. She knew I had EDS since we're required to make statements to the classes/grade so they know to be gentle. But she just turned to me and I quote, "You can wait. She's just a baby, let her be." I ended up switching seats with her at a red light so I could put her in her car seat and put my joints in place. After the nightmare car ride was over, I went to the bathroom to change into some sweatpants and my hoodie. Aileen glanced over at me and threw some leggings at me, trying to show off some more. Now, this was in the 6th grade and Aileen had little to no figure or curves, so I was clueless to why she wanted me to dress in tight-fitting clothes. We start out on the poster, and I got out my laptop to write out the information, when Aileen decides, with only 1 week left of the experiment, poster information and idea topic, to start a new one. I was livid. Cue, other girl's arrival, and she suggests that we do 2 projects, that I and her do the project I planned, and that Aileen can start a new one on her own. Aileen surprisingly agrees and we work. After we finish the work, we decide to order a pizza and get some ice cream. Aileen ordered a double melt pizza, feta cheese stuffed between mozzarella and dough with no sauce. Not very good, 3 out of 10. While the girl and I got halal pepperoni. She proceeded to complain and whine until I bought her another slice, so she would shut up. When we went to get ice cream, I wanted to get strawberry, but she claimed her allergies would flare up if I ate it. I asked her, what would me eating ice cream have to do with her allergies? Where she yelled at me in the middle of the Baskin-Robbins, claiming that the girl and I were going against her. Once we got back to the apartment, I called my dad and asked him to pick me up because I was finished with my project and wanted to go home. Finally, my dad arrives and saves me from that hell pit and takes me home where I can finally rest, only to see Aileen texted me saying that she accidentally threw out her project. Note, this was a 2x4 board, and you can't just accidentally throw it away. I got to school on Thursday to see that she had no other option than to stick with my project, and said she played a prank on me. Skipping to the end of the fair, I finally get some air to breathe with a blissful 2-week break from her. During the third term, I saw some clear change in her. She started styling her hair like mine, started adapting my mannerisms, wearing her uniform like mine, even going as far as to wear and buy the same brand names as me. Adidas, Nike, Off-White, Vans, etc. I soon realized she was trying to become me when she started asking my brother about my hygiene brands and what brands I wear at home. I blocked her off everything, made sure to change my style and upgrade, even going as far as dyeing my hair to get her to leave me alone. Eventually she weaned off me and the other girl and left us alone, leaving the school and moving to Abu Dhabi.
I've been through some scary experiences, but this was the worst thing I feel I've ever gone through in my life. I used to be a very naive, innocent kind of person. I was a type of optimist who believed that there was a touch of goodness in every heart, a dangerous mindset to be in. I realize now that seeing the world through my rose-colored glasses put a big, flashing red target on my back. Often when you think of scary stories involving creepy behavior and psychological abuse, you think of an occurrence from a stranger. In my case, it came from my mother-in-law. My husband's mother initially adored me, not for any reason other than thinking that I could be easily controlled. I was meek with a passive personality, so it made sense that I would come across like someone who could be easily influenced. Looking back on it, I cringe at how creepy the situation really was. For the sake of the story, I'll call my mother-in-law by the name of Mrs. Psycho. At the beginning of the relationship with my husband, Mrs. Psycho and I would get along great, or so I thought. She'd take me shopping, give compliments about my hair, and girly stuff like that. As the relationship with my partner grew more serious, she ran and raved to everyone in the neighborhood about how much she adored me and how I was like the daughter she never had. So naturally, I thought things were progressing positively, but certain things were just really off about Mrs. Psycho. I noticed little tidbits of her behavior at parties and neighborhood social gatherings. She'd sulk in the corner, and I chalk it up as her just being socially awkward or anxious, but looking back at it now, I noticed that she was always whimpering about something negative going on in her life, how she fell off her bike and hurt her elbow while riding through a construction zone, how one neighbor complained about her parking in front of his house, losing her job because she didn't get along with a coworker. The list went on and on. In every story, she portrayed herself as a victim of some unusual circumstances. One huge red flag that my mind didn't understand at the time was a story that she was telling about her other son, my partner's brother. She said some really disturbing things about how he held her, my partner, and his dad hostage in their home, and how he physically punched their father in the face. The way she described the story made it seem like my partner's brother was a bully to the whole family, and my partner didn't seem to think it was quite as severe as she made it sound. Regardless, in all her wild stories and accusations about him, she always scolded her son in ways that I can't imagine ever scolding my own child. What my husband and I didn't fully interpret at the time was the underlying problem, which wasn't necessarily his brother, but the woman who had been the driving force for the insanity behind the behavior. Psychological abuse can trigger emotional responses in very unpredictable and disturbing ways. Mrs. Psycho's behavior became evidently creepy after our engagement. First, she was angry that we didn't tell her immediately when we had gotten engaged. Then she was angry that we changed the wedding date without first asking her for permission. She expressed a desire for my future husband and I to live upstairs in her house and pay her rent. When we told her that we could afford our own home and we wanted to start a family, so it wouldn't work out, the infuriation in her eyes was frightening. She would look normal one moment. If you told her something she didn't want to hear, her eyes would turn black. The memory of her eyes still sends me with a frightening chill down my spine. From there, she became increasingly controlling. Mrs. Psycho and her husband, Mr. Psycho, would start showing up to our house every other day or so. I started counting how long they would go without having to see us, and the numbers came to a mere 3 days. There was no privacy, and I felt like I had to close the curtains over our windows every night. I just had this uneasy feeling. I locked the bedroom door as a routine before bed, just to be on the extra safe side. Despite our relationship being pleasant in the beginning, I noticed that I was now feeling like I was treading on eggshells around Mrs. Psycho, or rather landmines. It seemed like anything I said was offensive to her, no matter how innocent. I realized I couldn't talk to her like I used to be able to, when me and her son were just dating. I remembered when we would be able to have a nice, in-depth conversation, and I had allowed myself to be vulnerable with her. I confided in her about how I had a lot of social anxiety, and that her son came into my life during a time that I was suffering from crippling depression. I talked about how he brought a ray of sunshine into my life, thinking that speaking kindly about her son would please her, but she just has this unfeeling, glazed look in her face. Hoping to mend my relationship with her, I decided to help her out one day with organizing her antiques. She had this hobby of going to auctions and buying and selling knickknacks, buttons, and stuff like that. She'd get very proud of her collection of things that I sort of thought were junk, but to be polite, I told her I saw beauty in these things, hoping to get back on her good side. There were some creepy dolls in the mix, including this horrifying looking vampire doll with piercing red eyes. She said that she had that doll for years and used to scare her sons with it when they were little kids. She laughed at the memory, and the sound had an eerie, satanic vibe to it. As if it wasn't enough to freak me out, she told me the story about how a female coworker complained about her to HR. To seek revenge on this woman, Miss Psycho wrote a letter that was meant for the coworker's husband, telling him that she was cheating on him. To remain as anonymous as possible, she told me how she slipped on a pair of black gloves and drove the letter to a faraway location so that the address couldn't be traced. I remember feeling very uneasy about her story, wondering how she could get angry enough to drive hours away just to cause emotional harm to another human being. There came a point after hearing this story when I didn't want to be left alone with my partner's mom anymore. My partner tried to talk to his parents about how I was feeling like I was walking on eggshells around them, but they flipped the narrative to say that they were the one feeling on eggshells around me. During this time, I painstakingly realized that psychological torture exists in the form of extreme invalidation. Not having your feelings acknowledged can really drive a person crazy. It was then that I felt a little more clued in to what may have happened to Mrs. Psycho's other son. I can't be sure because I never met the guy, but I think he was driven mad by his mother's severe emotional neglect. Now she was pulling the same tricks on me and my partner, gaslighting us into believing that we were just too sensitive. When my husband and I started figuring out that something was off, things got even creepier. His parents started showing up at our house to corner us into submission. What I mean is, they would tell us stories to make them seem like victims so that we would give in to demands of what they wanted at the time. If we denied their request, they'd use psychological manipulation by telling us that we were uncaring or ungrateful. One demonstration of manipulation was when I became pregnant. I explained that the smell of pizza made me extremely sick, but this was ignored. Mrs. Psycho insisted that we go to a pizza restaurant for her birthday. I was confused with why I felt like I couldn't say no, My husband was in the same predicament. Somehow, I think he sensed that something bad would happen to us if we declined. This is also because Mrs. Psycho's husband and her sister had contacted us, telling us that we weren't allowed to say no to her dinner invitations anymore. They explained it like, saying no hurts her feelings, but there was something else there that I can't quite explain, something hidden beneath the surface that sounded really threatening. I had no idea why, but I just did not feel safe. Then, only 2 weeks after giving birth to our daughter, I had the creepiest interaction of my life. Mrs. Psycho caught me alone while I was on my front porch. The weather was really nice, so I was rocking back with my baby on one of our outdoor chairs. She came up to the doorstep and assumed a seat in the chair next to me. Then in a quiet, ominous voice, she said, "You have to share her, you know." Her black eyes flicked to the infant in my arms. I know what you might be thinking, but this wasn't said in a cute, exciting new grandma kind of way. Her voice was cold and possessive, with a certain passive-aggressive intent behind the statement. I naturally clutched my arms around my daughter tighter, feeling a protective instinct take over me. Mrs. Psycho had expressed to me before that she always wanted to have a daughter, but was only ever able to have sons. Maybe I was being influenced by my postpartum hormones or just overall feeling paranoid, but a disturbing thought occurred to me that she might want to get rid of me somehow to have my daughter to herself. I later told my husband about the bizarre interaction with his mom and how I couldn't keep up with the heavy psychological demands of his parents anymore. It was all taking a strange emotional toll on me as well as a strain on our marriage, and I still couldn't pinpoint exactly why. Nevertheless, they were causing us a lot of stress, which was impacted on me all the more while I was trying to adapt to my new role as a mother. They even restricted me in bizarre ways, telling me that I was not allowed to refer to our daughter as my baby. I had previously posted on Facebook about how excited and happy I was to be a new mom. I posted a side-by-side picture of me and my daughter with the caption, "She has my eyes," which was meant to be lighthearted and innocent. My mother-in-law commented on the post with, "My son had something to do with it too." Not only put a damper on my mood, but also felt creepy. Like, why did she have to mention something we already know? It was almost as if my happiness made her more enraged. I felt like I was starting to go crazy. The stress was enough to make me physically sick. At first, my husband hesitated when I told him about my concerns, stating the usual spiel that it was natural for him to say, that they were his parents, and that he couldn't just drop contact with them. But something in his voice contained fear, and it wouldn't take long before he realized how fucked up the situation actually was. The incident that drove him to the point of cutting off his parents happened when they cornered us in our own living room, the minute that we watched their unruly dog while they went on vacation for 5 days. My husband almost caved, but stayed firm when he told them, "No, we can't. We have a 2-month-old baby to look after." The murderous glare his mom then flashed at me was intense enough to make me crawl out of my skin. You know that look. The look that someone gives you before they're about to attack. It looked like something from the movies, very primal and hateful. I thought for sure that she was about to lunge at me and wring her hands down my neck, causing me death by strangulation. I was terrified. Mr. and Mrs. Psycho eventually left our house, but they were clearly angry that they weren't able to convince us to conform to their will. My husband and I had a dark, suspicious feeling that something bad was about to happen. First, we received lengthy emails from Mrs. Psycho, mostly insulting me. She said that she thought I was brainwashing her son. She went on to portray herself as a victim. She used the knowledge of my anxiety disorder to make an argument that I was mentally unstable and dangerous. She threatened to post about me on Facebook and make our life a living hell if we didn't apologize for deviating from what she wanted. At the same time, she told me that I was dead to her and listed all my mistakes I have ever made in the past, as well as criticizing my faults. I'd be lying if I said it didn't sting. My husband and I needed some space to recover from our emotional wounds that she had inflicted on us. We remained silent, not wanting to engage with her any further. My husband and I were pretty scared as well, as being hurt, spending most of our days cooped up in our own bedroom, not knowing what to expect. But we stayed strong through the process of separating from the toxic relationship. Mrs. Psycho proceeded to make good on her threats, posting about me publicly on Facebook. She said I was batshit crazy. She even went further, saying that I had borderline personality disorder, in all capital letters. This came out of complete nowhere. She knew I had anxiety, but I never mentioned anything about being borderline, because I wasn't diagnosed with that at all. It didn't end there though. She also posted a dramatic story of how we had banned her from seeing her grandchild. An active smear campaign against me ensued as Mr. and Mrs. Psycho actually went door to door to everyone's house in my community, posing as good citizens to warn everyone about their extremely dangerous, manipulative, 5-foot-tall daughter-in-law. My neighbors didn't react the way that was expected though. They were more wary of her than me. Instead of ruining my reputation, which was the desired effect, most people in my neighborhood were majorly creeped out by Mrs. Psycho's efforts. They were equally creeped out by Mr. Psycho's willingness to go along with the whole thing. I guess after years of being beaten down by his wife's abuse, he was just an empty shell of a man, a flying monkey to the proverbial wicked witch. There were a few doctors and therapists in my neighborhood who couldn't officially diagnose her since she wasn't their patient, but they set off the record that they believed Mrs. Psycho may have been projecting, meaning that she was, in a sense, confessing that she was potentially dangerous while pinning it all on me. This, along with some stories of Mrs. Psycho's interactions with other people in the neighborhood, confirmed that something was disturbingly off with this lady. This information made the situation all the more unsettling when Mr. and Mrs. Psycho showed up to her house for what we suspected would be a confrontation. My husband and I were watching Survivor in the living room with our baby when the doorbell rang. He crept behind the front window to peer behind the curtain to see who it was. I could see fear on his face. "It's my parents," he said, and my blood ran cold. I immediately ran with the baby upstairs, pausing only to tell him that it was his choice whether to answer the door or not, since they're his parents, but that me and the baby would be hidden away. As I made my way up the stairs, my husband hovered by the front door, conflicted. He didn't know what to do. Meanwhile, I could hear jostling at the front door, like his parents were trying to force their way inside of our house with a spare key. I thank God to this day that we changed the locks a few days before so they couldn't get in. I proceeded to run upstairs and close the bedroom door behind me, locking me and the baby inside. I held my daughter close, my heart thudding wildly against my chest. When there was a knock on the bedroom door, I reacted with a jolt. It scared me shitless. My husband's voice on the other side calmed me down though. He told me that he didn't answer the door. He was trembling when I unlocked the door to let him in. His face was pale. He showed me a text message from his dad saying, "Anyone home?" Followed by another text from his mother saying, "You're a coward, hiding behind your keyboard." I don't know what would have happened if my husband had chosen to open the door, but I shudder to think about it. My husband and I both blocked them after that. Phone numbers, social media accounts, everything. They moved away to another state, thank God. We have since had no contact with his parents for almost 2 years now, and our daughter is growing in a loving environment, free of toxicity. Sadly, we have had to block some of my husband's other family members because they kept telling us that we should talk to my in-laws, which, by the way, feels a lot like being told, "Please contact your abuser." For this reason, I sometimes feel like it would almost been better to be physically abused than mentally abused, because then there would have been some sort of visible evidence of the harm that had been inflicted. In the meantime, they have so far made no attempts to contact us with an apology or anything. Instead, they reached out with a nasty, "Have a shitty anniversary. You two are a match made in hell." which only further secured our decision to cut contact with them. I'm going to put this in for context that will be useful later down the road. On March 10th, my very good friend committed suicide. I was on site with officers and a few close friends who showed up that day as well. It was really rough for me and many others, and still affects me to this day. Now to the story, and a quick note, I'm going to skip the sexual parts of the relationship, as it was a weird sexual experience for me that generally made me lose sex drive, and I don't want to mark this as not safe for work. So back at the end of October, beginning of November, I dated this girl named Tina. She had such a shitty name that fit completely with the shit show of a person she was. This girl was really something. She was your basic white girl, loud, unfunny, and always on TikTok trying to do those dances. Our first date rolled around, and went to our high school's football game, and she wouldn't try to meet up with me at the concession stand because she was generally intimidated by me, for whatever fucking reason. Then all of a sudden, she basically wanted to be by me for the rest of the football game. She was extremely erratic in behavior that day, and that should have been the first red flag for me. Later that night, I was texting her and she pressured me to telling her about what happened with my friend and what it made me feel like. Normally, I'm a pretty open guy, but I just met this girl and didn't know what to think about her yet. But I gave in and I told her. Later that night, she started talking about how nobody would miss her if she was gone. I didn't know how to react as my anxiety kicked in. I kept trying to tell her that people needed her, and soon I told her I loved her as a panic response as things ramped up in her behavior. This was the first red flag I noticed, but in reality, it should have been the second, and I wish I stopped talking to her after that football game. But now that I was believing that the girl was suicidal, I was really stuck with her. I played up an act of liking her for a few weeks. My high school's homecoming was coming up, and I asked her to the dance. However, all plans almost ended right there when she ran from home in the middle of the night and had her friend text me about how she was going to kill herself. Shit got real for me. I was so angry as I yelled at her over the phone, asking her to tell me where she was. I told her that I was going to call the cops, but she insisted that I didn't. I was about to go 60 on every single road. She kept telling me that the cliffside that she had been sitting on would be great for jumping off and killing herself with. My rage and fear stirred up so much that I started crying and screaming. I went numb. I found her due to the fact that she was describing a woman who she thought was going to kidnap her or some bullshit. In reality, it was just a woman trying to get it out of the way of her car. So I slammed on the brakes as soon as I saw the woman and the owl and jumped out of my car. I had tears in my eyes and rage in my blood, and I begged this woman to help me find her. As soon as I did, I saw her outline near the tree line. I basically had to drag this 5'2" fuck out of this ditch and put her in the back of my car. Immediately she switched from being sad to angry and was calling me insane and kicking the back of my seat like a child. Later that night, I was talking with my mom. I was telling her that I wanted to break up with her and that I almost did, but I was completely terrified of the fact that if I did, she may end up dead. She was in my head. I constantly worried about her, and on top of that, her friends came after me as well to stir up more attention and drama, which they ate up like a pack of lions with their newly caught prey. Eventually, I did break up with her, as I found it was the right time and I built up courage enough to do it. I was happy for once, and she was not. I felt powerful and finally in control of my own actions again. I even stood up for myself when she tried to pin me as a sex addict and abuser, which was far from the case, and many people can confirm it. I told her how manipulative she was and how shitty her two-faced friends were. I told her how delusional her reality was, which went in tandem with the side conflict I was having with another friend, named Griffin. It turned out that she and Griffin had not only been manipulating me and my friend group, but were having an affair with each other while I and Tina were dating. So my friends decided to fully cut these people off, and Griffin was gone from our lives, but Tina was not. She continued to send her goons after us and harass us. I was the main target, but my friend Anna took a beating too, due to the fact that she was the only other girl in my friend group. I had enough and told the principal about each incident in hopes that she would be removed from school. I told them I wanted her away from me and my friends, as the harassment had become worse and worse. It went from just insults over Instagram DMs to filming our conversation and listening in on us, using it as blackmail. They even tried to tear apart a relationship I was in with this girl from my history class, Selena. The school didn't do much but tell them to stop, and then told me to stop, which I have no idea why, as I wasn't doing anything in particular. I took that quote-unquote advice and stopped. When she would harass us, I would just block them, but then quarantine happened and things became bad. The harassment picked up again, as they knew their school career couldn't be put online anymore, and eventually got pictures of Tina and Griffin FaceTiming and sexting over it as she flashed her tits and other things like that. I was disgusted. However, things slowed down as the 1 year of my friend's passing came up. I just hoped that it would be the end of it, as maybe a time of sadness would make them realize something, but it sure as hell didn't. I got a text last night from an unknown number at about 1 a.m. telling me I was a disgusting person and looked gross. I kept asking who it was, although I knew deep down who it really was. They were insulting me, and I insulted back, showing that I wouldn't take their shit. I asked who it was again, and they said, "Someone who hates you." And I kept going. I told them that I didn't even know them, and that they must be miserable to be texting someone they hate at 1 in the morning. They texted me saying, "I know who you are." And I asked, "Who am I then?" They said my name, spelled perfectly, which is a rare occurrence surprisingly. They went on to say things like, "Why did you hit me? You ruined my life. People thought my parents were abusing me." And then immediately switching to how they loved me and wanted me to be their wife, and how was I all of a sudden gay. None of this made sense, and I was generally afraid, as the erratic behavior was generally scary and concerning with some of the things they said earlier. Soon it turned for the worse. They were telling me that they knew where I lived, and they were describing my house in perfect detail. I grabbed a baseball bat and ran down the stairs to look out my window. It was pitch black, and my fight or flight instincts kicked in as I stared out the window trying to see any sort of shadow moving in the dark. My phone buzzed. They were in the backyard. I just texted calmly, but in reality, I was in a panic and I ran to the back windows. Still pitch black, and our dim porch and backyard lights weren't any help. All I knew to do then was call the cops. 2 cars showed up to my house, and I and my parents stayed up a bit later until they left. I showed them the text, and they asked if there was anyone who had threatened me. I just told them about my batshit crazy ex. I got a text about how boring I was and that they were blocking me. Not sure if that was related to the cops showing up, making things lame for them, or because I started texting with no reaction whatsoever. Either way, things went too far. Update. So last night, my friend Anna received a call from Tina. It was very interesting. She talked lewdly about what she did with her boyfriend. My friend's response was sarcastic, saying, "Thank you for telling me," as she knew it wasn't true. Later, she received a voicemail telling her to kill herself and called her a fat bitch. My friend Mark and I received calls and texts as well, nothing harmful, just harassment, but we reported every single thing to the head of our high school. Last update, I received over 20 Instagram calls, over 10 phone calls, and 5 voicemails from my ex. Slowed down my phone so much that I was unable to do anything but let it ring. I wanted to tear my head off. Tomorrow I'm getting the police involved again and pressing charges.